Today's video is about one of my favorite things, and that is making more plants for free. Specifically, I'm talking about propagating blackberry bushes. It's one of the easiest plants that you can propagate, even if you've never done it before. Now, there are a lot of ways to do this, but the ones I'm going to show you in this video are the ways that I have found that are the simplest, most beginner-friendly, no fuss, high rate of success, no special equipment needed ways that you can make more blackberry plants for your garden. So, let's get to it. When thinking about how to propagate blackberries, the question you need to ask is, how do they spread naturally in the wild? And really the question is, how don't they spread? Because they do it extremely readily. Now typically blackberries, especially I'm talking about these erect blackberries that I have, but this is also true for trailing types that are more of a vine or a climbing blackberry. They basically grow until they bend over and reach the ground, and then whenever it touches the ground, that is where they grow roots, and it's as simple as that. And then a new plant begins to grow from that point of ground contact. And this is a really common way for all kinds of plants to propagate themselves, and it's called layering, and it really is as simple as that, and I'm going to show you how to do that later in the video. The other way they tend to propagate themselves is, of course, by seed, right? That's going to be a topic for a future video. A bird eats the berries and the seeds get passed through and spread around, and new plants hopefully come out of that. But then the other way that they do it is by sending out runners underground. You may have heard that some blackberry varieties, especially wild blackberries, can be kind of invasive. And this is because underground they send out runners all over the place and just pop up new plants. This even does happen with some cultivated varieties as well, but that's one of the really simple ways that blackberries propagate themselves. Now, before we get into actually making more blackberry plants, just a little word of caution, because technically a lot of the named blackberry cultivars that you may know are really still under the protection of the patent. And what that means is you can't legally propagate them. Of course, for commercial sale, but even for home use, you're not supposed to multiply the plants. And that's to protect these breeding programs that come up with these really great varieties. So just as an example, the two varieties I'm growing, one of them, this big one behind me, is called Navajo. And that came from the University of Arkansas breeding program, which has come out with so many amazing thornless, heat-tolerant, disease-resistant varieties. It's a lot of the ones that you commonly see in the nurseries. But the problem is it is still patented, and so you cannot legally propagate. So I will not be showing you how to make more plants out of the Navajo. But luckily I have another variety that's called Sweetie Pie, and that one is okay to propagate. The first way I'm going to show you is a little bit of cheating. I don't know if you can call this propagating, but it is the easiest way I've found to make more blackberry plants. And that is simply to let them send out their underground runners and pop up plants somewhere else, and then you just dig them up, pot them up, and replant them where you want them. I have done this a couple times. And I also think it's a little bit of a workaround from what I was telling you before about being unable to legally propagate. Well, in this case, the plant has propagated itself. Now, this is the Sweetie Pie blackberry, but it has shot a runner underneath this fence, and I'm about 8 to 10 feet away from where the plant is originally planted. Luckily they've kind of stayed contained in this area, which I think is really interesting. So I've just let them grow for a little bit, and now I'm just going to dig them up, put them in a pot, and then when I'm ready to relocate them, I can put them back in the ground where I want them. These are all primicanes, which means they'll fruit next year, so this is a pretty good time to dig them up. You can also see behind me there's this one really tall guy growing back there. I would suggest, if you're going to do this method, if you're going to dig up plants and relocate them, that you do this either in the early spring, right as the growing season is beginning, or in the fall when fruiting is over, when the hot weather has passed. That way the plants don't stress out. That's the best time to do any sort of transplanting. And if you're curious about how to transplant bigger blackberry bushes, I do have a video on that I will link to. Okay, now let's talk about tip layering. So there's a few ways you can do this. You don't need to do anything really fancy, but for one thing you could do, especially if you're trying to increase the number of plants you have, but you're really keeping them in the same area, you could just dig into the ground, bury the tip of the plant, and let it do its thing. That would probably be the simplest way to do this. But I'm gonna use a pot because I don't wanna keep these bushes here in this spot. So I'm gonna show you how to do it with a pot. So the tip of the blackberry, what we have here is all these leaf nodes here at the end, and each one of these is where roots could potentially come from. So basically what we want to do is bury the tip of the plant into the soil so that it has a chance to root. And I want to bury at least 3, maybe even as many as 4 leaf nodes to have the maximum chance of roots actually starting to grow. So in order to do that, I'm going to snip off and remove the leaves at the end of this branch. All right, and next, the simple thing to do is to just bury it in your pot. Now in this pot I have, you can use any sort of potting soil. This is something that I concocted. It's mostly composted pine bark. There's a little bit of compost, there's a little bit of peat moss, and I think a little bit of perlite in there. But mostly it's just composted pine bark. You just want a nice medium that is loose and sterile. So in other words, don't dig up your garden soil necessarily and use it to root. It might work in the ground, but it can be finicky in a pot. So I really would recommend using some sort of potting mix or some sort of simple potting medium like composted pine bark. So all we have to do, make some space in the pot and just stick the tip in there. Okay, so I've packed it down pretty firmly. I'm going to top off with a little bit more pine bark or a little bit more of my potting mix just to make sure it's buried deeply enough. This looks pretty stable, but if you feel like it could pop out easily, you can weigh it down with some rocks, or you can stake it, tie it into something so that it stays put. But that's basically it. Then we just wait and see how it grows. Now we're going to propagate from cuttings. Now, ideally, you would do this while the bush is dormant. You'd take cuttings from dormant wood that has lost its leaves and has gone to sleep for the winter. Now, my bushes never actually go dormant. In my climate, they keep their leaves. They never entirely stop growing, although they do slow down a lot over the winter. So the best chance of success you'll have is if you use that hardwood, that dormant wood. So you would take a cutting from one of the dormant overwintering canes, and the procedure is basically the same as what I'm going to show you. Essentially stick them in the dirt and they start to grow. That would be the best way to do it. I could have done that earlier this spring, but honestly it works almost as well to take cuttings from green wood. When it's time to choose where to take your green cuttings from, you want to look for one of the primocanes. Primocanes are this year's growth. It's the canes that come up from the base of the blackberry plant this spring and are currently growing. And if you can see, there are no blossoms on this cane. And that's because it doesn't blossom until its second year of growth, and that's when it becomes a floricane. And you don't want to take a green cutting from a floricane, first of all, because it's putting its energy toward trying to make that fruit happen. So you probably could propagate from a floricane, but wouldn't you rather have blackberries? So we're going to look for these primocanes. And this is a great time of year to do this. This is late spring. This is already grown up. Obviously you can see really, really tall. This is an 8-foot fence and it is at the top. And I don't need 8-foot tall primocanes. And if I let this grow throughout the whole year, it would probably get 12 plus feet long. And I don't need that unless I'm gonna bend it over and let it tip layer into the ground by itself. So I always trim my primocanes back to between 3 and 4 feet every spring. So that way I have a good structure for my plant and it helps with fruiting. And if you want to see a little bit more, by the way, about how to prune your blackberry bushes, I'll link to that video. So I'm going to kill 2 birds with 1 stone, and I'm going to trim this guy down to 3 to 4 feet, and then I will use the part I trimmed off to make my cuttings. So the first thing I'm gonna do is cut this down into about 8 to 10 inch segments. They don't need to be too long. And when you make a cut, you want to do it in between two of the leaf nodes, or two of the buds. So somewhere in between, I usually do it just above one of the leaf nodes. There's one. As you do this, keep track of which direction that your cuttings are pointing in. So one thing that a lot of nurseries will do, will cut the base of each cutting flat, straight across, and then cut the top of the cutting at an angle. That way you can clearly see which way is down and which way is up. So once you've got your cuttings all sorted out at the right length, now you can cut off most of the leaves on each cutting. I'm literally gonna leave like 1 to 2 leaves at the most. The reason is, it's because at each of these leaf nodes, like I mentioned earlier, is where the roots are gonna grow. So you wanna try to bury 2 to 3 leaf nodes. In fact, I think I'm even gonna trim off a little bit more of the bottom and try to see if I can get all 3 of these under the ground. If your leaf is really big, this one's lovely and caterpillar chewed, you can even cut the leaf down in half. The reason is you don't want the plant to get too stressed out. Leaves is the main place that a plant loses moisture. And so you want to keep moisture in. Moisture is going to be key to help the plant propagate. So you want to try to balance how much moisture it can take up through the stem versus how much it's losing through the leaves. A little bit of leaf is good. It helps obviously collect the sun energy and photosynthesis and all that good stuff, but we don't want too much greenery on these cuttings. So now I have my cuttings. Now all I need to do is bury them in the pot. Like I said, aim to get at least 2 or possibly even 3 leaf nodes below the surface. So you want a fairly deep pot for this. This is about as small as I would go. Probably would be better if they were even slightly deeper, but I think I can get 2 to 3 nodes for each of these pots. All right, it's as simple as that. So I'm gonna top each of these off with a little bit more potting mix just to make sure they're really buried and that there's a good stretch of stem underneath the dirt. After that, it's just a matter of watering really well. You wanna keep these moist but not soggy. If you want a really controlled situation, I would put them maybe even inside under a grow light where you can control the temperature, under some sort of humidity dome or covering just to keep the moisture there. I have a simpler way that I have found effective, and that is to simply tuck them outside somewhere sheltered where they don't get much sunlight. So I have a spot right next to my hose that I tuck it kind of right against the edge of my house. It gets a little bit of morning sun, but then is sheltered the rest of the day. And I like it by my hose because then I can remember to check and see if I need to water it. And you know, where I live, it's pretty humid. The temperatures are really mild right now, so I'm probably going to stay within that ideal range of kind of 60 to 80 degrees, which is the best chance that these have at propagating. So I'll keep an eye on them. I can always move them inside or move them to another spot if I need to, but I've had really good success just leaving them in a really kind of sheltered location. Remember that sheltered location? Well, things were going great. But then I went out of town for a week and we got record rainfalls and my poor cuttings got waterlogged. You know, if I had been home, I would have moved them. It would have been fine, but such is life. So I redid the cuttings in the same way. The only difference is that I did put them in a little bit bigger pot so that way I could bury them deeper and just have better water retention in the soil and just kind of control the environment a little bit better. And so far they're doing okay. They're doing pretty good. I'm seeing the first signs of new growth coming at those leaf nodes. So I just need to keep them happy, need to keep them in light, but out of the direct sun, somewhere where I control the water, and they should be just fine. So we have to wait a little longer. It's been a couple weeks since I repotted these. I have to wait a little longer to see them really take off. But now let me show you the one that I layered. So here we go, and as you can see, this is doing great. It did not take very long. It was maybe only a week or so before I started seeing new growth coming up from the roots. So I know that this is completely happy and ready to go, and there are plenty of roots down there. So all I need to do now is just cut the part that I dug into the ground. I'm going to cut it a couple leaf nodes up, and that's going to begin to grow into its own little cane there, but you can see I've got a really good start on this plant. So all I have to do is keep it watered. I'm still going to keep it out of really strong direct sun because I don't want it to get too stressed. And I can plant this either this fall, or I can keep it in the pot all the way through the spring, but it's really simple. But there's one more thing I wanted to show you, a little happy accident that happened. Take a look at this. So this is actually a raspberry plant that I dug up earlier this spring and potted up because I wanted to move it. But it started to grow, as they do, and I got this really, really long cane. And if you can see over here, it has completely buried itself in the ground and has started to root down here. So if I wanted to, if this is where I wanted them to land finally, which I'm not sure it is, all I would have to do is cut this cane, and all of a sudden I would have a new plant in this new location. So, I mean, let's face it, sometimes the best thing to do is to let Mother Nature just do its thing. So it really is as simple as that. So let me know in the comments, what are your favorite ways to propagate blackberries and raspberries? Do you have any little hacks or easy tricks that you've found that work really well? Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.